All right, today we're tackling an event that's often called the spark that lit a nation's fire, the 1872 Cavite Mutiny. We're going to dig into how one seemingly small uprising could end up putting the entire Philippines on the path to revolution. So picture this. It's 1872. You've got about 200 Filipino workers and soldiers at an arsenal in Cavite who decide to revolt. I mean, in the grand sweep of colonial history, you might just look at that and think it's a minor blip on the radar. But the way the Spanish government reacted, well, that was anything but minor. The mutiny itself was put down really fast, but the consequences were huge. It all ended with the shocking public execution of 3 Filipino priests who many people believed had absolutely nothing to do with it. And that's the real puzzle here, isn't it? How does a local dispute over labor rights explode into a national tragedy, one that would directly fuel a full-blown revolution just a few decades later? Well, the answer isn't as straightforward as you might think, because as we're about to see, there isn't just one version of what happened in Cavite. There are actually 2 competing stories, 2 totally different takes on history. And trying to figure them out tells us a whole lot about how a nation's story gets written. To really understand the impact, we have to start with the end result, the execution of those 3 priests. They had become known to history as Gomburza, and honestly, their deaths became the real story, completely overshadowing the mutiny that started it all. And this quote just says it all. You have the Philippines' national hero, Jose Rizal, dedicating his most famous novel, a book that basically laid the groundwork for the revolution, directly to these 3 men. He saw their execution not as a tragedy that ended something, but as one that started everything. So who exactly were these guys, Gomburza? Well, the name is just a mashup of their names, Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora. They were well-known priests who were pushing for reforms and for more rights for Filipino clergy. The Spanish pointed the finger at them, called them the masterminds of the mutiny, and sent them to their deaths. But get this, the Archbishop of Manila himself had so many doubts about their guilt that he refused to strip them of their priestly authority before they were killed. That's a huge tell, right? Okay, so let's dig into the first version of events, the one you'll hear most often. This is the story of a labor dispute that just went horribly, horribly wrong. Now, according to this narrative, the whole thing was a spontaneous uprising. It was just a reaction from some really ticked-off workers to a very specific and very unfair new policy. The timeline seems pretty clear-cut. This new, super strict Governor General, Rafael D. Izquierdo, shows up. One of his first moves is to take away these benefits the arsenal workers had for a long time, like not having to pay taxes or do forced labor. A few weeks later, boom, the workers revolt. It's crushed in just 2 days, and less than a month after that, Gomburza are dead. So the key takeaway from this version is that the Spanish authorities basically saw their chance. They used the small mutiny as the perfect excuse to crack down on this rising group of educated, reform-minded Filipinos. Gomburza were simply the most famous and therefore the most convenient scapegoats. But what if that's not the whole story? There's another version, a different theory, that completely reframes the event from a simple protest into something much, much bigger. I mean, what if this wasn't just some spontaneous thing? What if the Spanish weren't just being opportunistic, but were actually reacting to a real, genuine, though ultimately failed attempt at a revolution? This second theory argues that the Cavite Mutiny was actually a planned bid for independence. The whole idea was to completely overthrow Spanish rule. The complaints about labor rights, that was just the match that was supposed to light the fuse, not the actual bomb. And this isn't just a wild guess. This theory comes from going back and looking at the original documents, especially Governor Izquierdo's own reports back to Spain and the testimony of a sergeant who was part of the uprising. These sources suggest there was a coordinated plot with a goal that was way more radical than just getting tax exemptions back. So now we're left with 2 competing truths. Was this a mutiny over working conditions that was punished with incredible brutality? Or was it a failed revolution that history has kind of simplified over the years? And this, right here, is the million-dollar question that the second theory forces us to ask. If the priests were innocent scapegoats, then who were the real ringleaders of this whole operation? Well, this theory points to a totally different group of guys. You've got Francisco Zaldúa and Enrique Paraiso as the recruiters on the ground, And then you have two wealthy businessmen, Maximo Inocencio and Crisanto de los Reyes, as the money behind the operation. It's also worth noting that all of them were connected to Masonry, and back then, that was a huge red flag for the Spanish authorities, who saw Masons as a threat.
Okay, let's just put these two stories side by side so it's super clear. The official story says the cause was worker benefits, the goal was getting those benefits back, and Gomburza were scapegoats. The conspiracy theory says the cause was a planned revolution, the goal was independence, and Gomburza were just innocent victims caught in the middle of it all.
But here's where it gets really fascinating. Because while historians can debate the cause all day long, the effect of what happened is not up for debate at all. The legacy of Cavite is clear, and it changed the Philippines forever. At the end of the day, it almost doesn't matter which version is technically true, because the story that captured the imagination of the Filipino people was the story of 3 innocent priests martyred by a cruel, unjust colonial government. And this number really drives that point home. An estimated 40,000 people gathered to watch the execution. This wasn't just some legal proceeding, it was a public spectacle, and it created this moment of shared grief and anger that brought people together like never before. And that is the ultimate impact, the real takeaway here. The execution turned Gomburza into martyrs. It gave the nationalist movement a powerful, unifying symbol. It absolutely lit a fire under a new generation of revolutionaries like Rizal. You can draw a straight line from this event in 1872 right to the start of the Philippine Revolution in 1896. The spark had found its tinder. So, it leaves us with this final, big question. The story of the Cavite Mutiny really shows us that sometimes the true power of an event isn't about what actually happened, but about the story that people decide to tell about it later. It really makes you wonder, when history gives us conflicting versions, what decides which story is the one we all remember, and why? Thanks for tuning in.